In 1830, the famous Greek-Orthodox cantor and composer Theodoros Fokaevs published together with Stavrakis Vizantios in Galata the first printed collection of Ottoman pieces written in the Neo-Byzantine notational system known as New Method. The collection was given the title of Thepi, the name of one of the muses of ancient Greek mythology. It contains mainly Ottoman şarkı, but also some Greek-language Phanariotic songs. 13 years later, Fokaevs published in Constantinople a similar collection to which he gave the name of Pandora, another figure of ancient Greek mythology. Many of the songs of the collection are the same as those of Stepi, but there are also some important additions to both the Turkish language and Greek language repertoire. In 1856, Ioannis Kevelis, a lesser-known cantor and musician, published another collection of Ottoman pieces notated in the New Method system, which was republished in 1872 with new material and the addition of Greek language songs in a second volume. In the context of our research project InterMusiG, we are in the process of transcribing selected pieces from the above collections into the RLSG's adaptation of the European staff notation. This process presented certain methodological challenges, which we will discuss in the first part of this presentation, but also with primary findings that could lead us to the formulation of some initial hypotheses about the secular music of Istanbul in the 19th century, which we will present in the second part of this announcement. The first problem we had to deal with concerns the different theoretical ways of approaching the intervals of Hijaz scale structures. New method theory names Hijaz intervals chromatic and distinguishes them into mild and tense. Roughly speaking, it can be argued that in the view of new method theorists, when Hijaz intervals approach equal temperaments are understood as tense chromatic, while when they move away from it are understood as mild chromatic, additionally characterized by intervallic liquidity. Thus, in all the new method treatises, the middle interval of a tense chromatic tetrachord is bigger than that of a mild chromatic tetrachord, and accordingly the edge intervals of a tense chromatic tetrachord are smaller than those of a mild chromatic tetrachord. However, the precise intervallic character of both types of chromatic scale structures is a matter of disagreement among 19th century and later 20th century new method theorists. In contrast, the Turkish theory distinguishes only one kind of chromatic intervals for all the matams associated with the Hijaz scale structures. Hence, in order not to miss potentially useful information that could emerge from this distinction, we decided to adjust the system of RLSG's accidentals as follows. Here we see the accidentals we use to render tense chromatic passages at their most common occurrences, and here the accidentals to render mild chromatic intervals at their most common occurrences. Tense Hijaz intervals on Didia, tense Hijaz intervals on Rast, mild Hijaz intervals on Neva, etc. It should be pointed out that the use of the above accidentals doesn't indicate the use of the specific intervals in practice, but is a transcriptional convention that only roughly corresponds to the average of the plurality of the interpretation. So, the second challenge. The second problem we had to deal with concerns the so-called qualitative signs of the new method. Although in theory Each of these signs indicate particular expressive vocal elements, for example, special dynamics or ornamentation. In practice, there is a great deal of freedom and variation depending on the particular changing style as to how they are interpreted. Furthermore, new method system has some strict rules according to which some particular sign complexes have to be accompanied by some of the quality signs. Hence, since the presence of a quality sign in a new method score is not per se the result of the editor's collector's intentional attempt to indicate a particular vocal element, we decided to ignore quality signs in our transcription. Ottoman pieces in room collections are anyway notated in a very descriptive way called analytical by psalmic serfs, the psalmic milieu, in most cases, which attempts to record the delicate vocal ornaments through quantity signs. Third challenge. Our third problem had to do with a temporal sign called vigorgon, on the exact use of which the 19th century theorists do not agree. Some of them claim that vigorgon divides a quarter into three equal parts, while the rest that it divides it into three parts of undefined duration. Furthermore, the first group of theoreticians suggest the usage of a dot in order to indicate unequal divisions of the quarter in three, as follows. The issue is further complicated by the fact that in chanting practice, the isometric division of the quartet into three parts corresponding to the Western triplet is extremely unusual. The observation that both Vokaevs and Kevelis often use both the symbol vigorgon and dotted vigorgon in their recordings led us to the decision to describe all symbol vigorga as triplets, considering that their use is probably not accidental. Overall, the way we ended up resolving the above issues gave us transcriptions that are faithful to the new method source, but twisty for someone familiar with our LSG system. Thus, we decided, in addition to our literal transcriptions, which can lead to useful scientific conclusions and which we could call transnotations, to make transcriptions based on the modern conventions of our LSG system, mainly for use by musicians specialized in Ottoman music and, of course, according to the contemporary oral practices.
Thank you. Now, we move on to some preliminary assumptions. The first thing one notices in the collections of both Vokaevs and Kevelis is the detailed recording of various ornamentation. This way of notating was also common in the chant books of the time, and let's see here, yeah, and is revealing of the phonocentric character of the new method. Moreover, it can give us important clues both about the sources of the collectors, who were probably singers, as well as about the recipients of the collections, who were probably cantors who wanted to further develop their vocal skills and repertoire. The assumption that the collections were addressed to cantors and not musicians who wanted to immerse themselves in Ottoman music is reinforced by the fact that the notators had a close relationship with the usul, although they referred to it. It is not uncommon for the durations of the notes not to match the rhythmic fit of the given usul, especially if it is a long one. In these cases, we decided either to fill in the gaps with bracketed pauses or to omit the recording of measures altogether. We will continue with an observation arising from the distinction between mild and tense Hijaz, which we discussed earlier. There are cases of pieces that, although belonging to the same makam of Hijaz family, are recorded, one with mild and the other with tense chromatic intervals. For example, where is our example? Yeah. The Hijaskar Sharki, Chesmia Bir Güzel, composed by Sermuezin Rifat Bey, is recorded by Kevelis with tense chromatic intervals, while immediately afterwards, the Hijaskar Sarki Gormek Muiser Olmandu Mahum, composed by Hanenden Nikos, is recorded by the same notator with mild chromatic intervals. According to the new method conventions, it is customary for some notators to indicate mild chromatic intervals for melodic phrases that are developed within a trichord and tense chromatic intervals for phrases that are developed within a tetrachord or pentachord. This is not the case here, since both pieces develop chromatic passages within only tetrachords and pentachords. Walter Feldman, in private discussions with our group, suggested the very interesting assumption that this differentiation probably indicates different sources of Kevelis. The source for the piece written in mild Hijaskar was a folk musician, while the source for the piece written in tense Hijaskar was a court musician. The existence of identical pieces in more than one collection can give us useful insights into the evolution of Ottoman music over time. What can be observed is that the recordings of Kevelis in 1856 and 1872 compared to those of Fokaevs in 1830 or 1843 are usually more ornamented. The change in the recording of melodies from a simpler form to a more ornamented one is a phenomenon that was also occurring in chanting books at that time, as we have mentioned before. This makes us wonder, is it a change in the way chanters perceived and used notation from an index of the melodic skeleton to a recorder of the details of the performance? Or is it, at least in part, a notational reflection of a possible change in the interpretation itself of both the Ottoman pieces and the Neo-Byzantine chants from a simpler to a more elaborate vocal style? If the latter is the case, then it is not unlikely that such a development of ornamentations in the music lines was accompanied by a slowing down or even a relaxation of the older tempo of the pieces. You can see here the first three phrases of the Hijaz Beste, Olmandan, Diller, Rubuden Gamzei, Chandusuna of Halim Bey, as recorded by Fokaevs in 1843 and as recorded by Kevelis in 1872. We will sing you together with Nikos phrase by phrase the two versions of the extract. The transition from the relatively simple to the more complex and sophisticated is obvious. Similar conclusions can also be drawn if we go even further back in time and compare the versions of the Greek collections with corresponding Habarsum recordings, as they are posted on the official website of Corpus Musicae Ottomanike. Such is the case, for example, of Benli Hassan Agaz Rast Peshref, we can compare the beginning of its teslim as it is recorded by Habarsum in the early 19th century and by Kevelis in 1872. Finally, fruitful conclusions can also be drawn from comparisons between the Ottoman pieces recorded in room collections and the corresponding classical versions established in Turkey at the beginning of the 18th century. Indicatively, we could contradict the version given by Kevelis of the Suzinak Shaki Engonchai Gülzar Unnuvazush, composed by Nikos with its classic version. More characteristic is the differentiation of the concluding phrase, which in the Kevelis version is done with mild Hijaz intervals, while in the classical version it is done with rast intervals. Let's listen to Nikos Andrikos interpreting the cadence by Kevelis.
Gel oyna acı aşık
And now its classical version.
Gel oyna acı aşık
The process of transcribing the Ottoman pieces of the room collections from the new method to the Western score was for us a more challenging process than one could suspect at first glance. The above hypotheses are just a first sample of how many new scholarly paths the study of this largely unexplored field can lead us down. We hope that in the near future, our transcriptions will shed light on obscure aspects of 19th century Ottoman music and enrich or even diversify, if that seems inevitable, our hitherto entrenched understanding of it. Thank you very much.